Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as it will help getting our show to others and help us get to our next milestone. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Rich Bishop. Rich is the VP of Revenue Operations at Order Groove. He's also the host of the Midgame Mindset podcast. And as a seasoned revenue operations leader, Rich brings a wealth of expertise in go-to-market operations, finance, systems, and strategy to the forefront, cultivating a career marked by innovation and transformative impact. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Enrique. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, brother. And I will tell you that he is also a fellow Outlier project member with me. And so go Outliers.
That's
but
right.
Folks, today we will be speaking about why most sales strategies fail and how great leaders actually win the mid-game. But Rich, before we get into talking about all that, tell us a little bit about you that the audience may not know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think from a career standpoint, spent quite a bit of time in finance and operations before jumping into revenue operations. I've been in that space now for about 15 years or so. I've worked with companies that are VC backed, that are startups. I've worked with international large corporations as well. So really a breadth of what it takes to be successful in large organizations as well as in smaller organizations. On the personal front, I'm very big into fitness. I practice jujitsu. I like to play golf, which Enrique, we still have to go, and really just like being active, kind of testing myself. And then, I've got a wonderful wife named Carrie and two teenage daughters, one of them getting ready to go to college. So you can understand where the gray hair comes from.
I know that full well because I have a full head as well. And yes, we'll get together soon to hit around the golf. But it's interesting to see how dynamic our life becomes as we're personally trying to strive to be these leaders in these different industries. And most sales teams don't fail because of effort. They fail because of misalignment. Now, I want to talk about that. And in your experience, what's the one strategic disconnect leaders consistently overlook that quietly kills execution?
I would say there's probably two, if I could. So first and foremost, it's alignment within the executive team. When we look at a customer's journey, it starts with marketing, right? You need to be aware of the brand. Maybe you have a need, and so you're interested in finding out more about whatever that product is or whatever that need is that you have to fill. Then there's a handoff to sales, right? And you have a conversation with sales. Maybe you're going through the website, needing to talk to somebody. There's a journey there with the sales team to coming up with the decision. Once that decision's made, the company then needs to fulfill whatever that request is, whether it's purchasing software and being onboarded onto that software package or delivery of a physical good or service, whatever that happens to be. And then how do you maintain that relationship moving forward? And at each step along the way where you have those handoff points, there are a lot of companies that really struggle with that because as leaders, especially as we get busy, we tend to get myopic almost in the way that we look, right? We tend to put the blinders on and I focus on my team and what we are doing and what I am responsible for as a leader and not necessarily what the customer experiences from a journey standpoint, right? And so not having true alignment from a customer's perspective and making sure that those handoffs are smooth can create an experience like you're traveling cross country on a train and you have to get to a station, get off that train, right? Find the next train to get to the next station, and things can go wrong in between. Maybe things can get dropped. A schedule can change. And then all of a sudden you're left there kind of with your arms open, wondering what's next. And company leaders need to understand and make sure that that handoff process is as smooth as possible so that the customer has the best possible experience along the way. And a lot of times those leaders can really, I think, get disconnected from one another, which then creates a disconnected journey for the customer.
Absolutely. Now, you work with and in the mid game, that messy space between strategy and results. What separates organizations that talk about sales strategy from those that actually execute it under pressure?
Yeah, as a company grows, what ends up happening, I think, is a lot of time we get very, very focused on the execution, right? And sometimes we don't step back and look at the strategy more broadly and make sure that it's appropriate for where we are kind of in the company's journey. And many times a company will hit different inflection points as they grow, where what got them to the point that they're at now won't get them to where they need to go, right? So you hit these inflection points at like $10 million in revenue, 30 million in revenue, 100 million in revenue, 200. There are a couple different places along the way where you really need to step back as a leader and look at the strategy, look at the operations and the way that the business is run, and be able to make some fundamental changes to the way that things are done in order to allow for that growth. Otherwise, the burden really then ends up falling on the people, and there's only so much money that you can throw at people to keep them there when they're going to be unhappy, they're going to be overworked, et cetera, right? So with a lot of that, it's being able to step back and understand the importance of looking at the strategy while still trying to execute. But where a lot of it falls down is leaders are still very, very focused on the execution, and for good reason, that sometimes they may want the result of stepping back and looking at the strategy, but adding the additional workload of changing the strategy while also trying to execute creates additional workload. It creates a lot of stress. It really gets hard to do. And so that really is the rub that I see a lot with sales leaders, especially.
Now, talking about what got you here won't get you there. If you were brought in to fix a struggling sales organization in, let's say, 90 days, what would you look at first and what would you ignore, even if leadership insisted that it was the problem?
Yeah, and this definitely happens where a lot of times it's, hey, our turnover is really high, or our sales reps aren't producing like we need them to produce, or they're not hitting the quotas that we've set. And so a lot of times the initial ask will be, well, we need our reps to be more productive. Well, yeah, you do, but the environment that they're working in, it really kind of dictates the performance that they're giving, right? So if you're at one of those inflection points that we talked about and you're having that issue, it most likely is a strategy and an operations issue and not necessarily the reps themselves. So when you come into it and you're looking at the first 90 days in that situation, it's let's step back and see what is the environment that the reps are working in. Do they have the support that they need? Or do we have the right hiring practices that we're getting the right people in place? Do they have the systems in place to really support them? Do they even know what to do on a day-to-day basis? Because, there are a lot of companies that will get hire on experienced reps and just kind of throw them to the wolves and hope that they figure it out. How structured is the process to get them up to speed and ready to go? And if it's not very structured, well, it's no wonder why they're failing or not delivering what you expect. So how can you guide them through that process to deliver the results that you're looking for? And really kind of understanding the pieces that go into it a lot of the times are really where to focus, especially in those first 90 days.
Very powerful. Now, this is an issue that most of us have, regardless of the community we're serving in. And it's when we take somebody that's a top performer and make them the immediate leader, right? And sales leaders often promote top performers into leadership roles, but execution breaks down. So, what
Mm-hmm.
mindset shift must happen when someone moves from closing deals to building a sales engine?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a lot of other departments and specialties within a company where that can work, right? In accounting, maybe you can become an accounting manager because you're the strongest technically and you understand those pieces. And many of the people can be, very self-sufficient, not need a lot of motivation in order to close the books. On the sales side of things, though, you're working with a very different personality there, right? Salespeople are generally very competitive, right? They want to win, they want to make money. And a lot of times, making the shift from being competitive for myself to win, which in many cases, that really is what drives a salesperson, that when you make the move to being the sales leader, it becomes much more about the team. And what can you do to make the team win and set the team up for success? It's not about personal success at that point. It's about the team's success. And that is a major mindset shift that needs to take place. And frankly, there are a lot of sales reps that are not equipped or ready to take that leap, right? So I know, Enrique, you're a big fan and disciple of John Maxwell. I am as well, right? It goes back to the law of the lid in making sure that you can lift that your leadership capabilities to the situation that you're in or the one that you want to grow into in order to be successful. And, sometimes we throw, as sales leaders, we'll throw a successful sales rep into a leadership position when they're not necessarily aware of that mindset shift that needs to take place, or frankly, maybe they're not even willing to make that type of shift to focus on the team rather than their own personal success. And that can create a lot of issues.
Yeah, you remind me of an event that happened while I was leading in the military where I specifically asked the leader, "Are you willing to lead?" And they said, "I never wanted to lead."
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously was keen to identify that early, and I knew it. But he had been struggling because they put him in a position he didn't even want to be. And so I quickly made some adjustments, and he was no longer the leader. But it was to his like joy. He was like,
Yes.
"Thank you." Right? And sometimes we have to do that. We got to identify that if you're a leader. Now, some people have been pegged right, they've been identified right, and they are leading and are ready to lead. And looking ahead, what capability will define the most effective sales leaders in the next 5 years? And what should leaders start doing today to avoid being left behind?
Yeah, I think one of the major trends that has been all over, the news, LinkedIn, everywhere you look, everybody's talking about AI. And frankly, I think at this point that concept is somewhat being beat to death, right? But it really has had an impact on the sales and marketing side, especially because of all of the automation and the tools that have now been created from some of this technology, that I think there are a lot of sales leaders that are relying too much on the technology and not relying enough on pure relationship building and trust building, right? So I think the major kind of shift over the next 5 years, and you're starting to see, I think in many ways, a swing back on the pendulum back to this side, but being able to navigate, how do I use the technology and the tools to help? But at the heart of it all, we're still going to focus on the genuine human connection and the trust building and the relationship building that we're going to be able to use to then execute. It's not all technology. That human centeredness is going to be even more important as more and more around us becomes automated and systematized.
When we are looking at progressing teams, whether it's a sales leader or a just a regular leader in charge of teams, you have to keep all these things that Rich has mentioned into perspective and in an alignment of how you're leading these folks, because it's nice to bring up people to the position that they can be leaders. And in sales, you mentioned it takes a different kind of person, right? This person, if you don't know what salespeople are like, you won't be able to lead them, because most people that I know in sales are self-sufficient. You tell them
Hmm.
where it is that they're hunting, and they're out there, and they're out there doing it, because there's just special quality about salespeople. But as we've been talking, I've gone through the recesses of my memory about sales teams that I come across all along. Everything you've shared has been spot on. And folks, if you're listening and you do have a sales team, this is the type of information that you need to equip yourself with in order to take those salespeople and bring them up correctly and identify them correctly for the next position. So thank you for sharing all that. Now, Rich, I know that you have some new things going on, but you also have the podcast. So what do you have coming up, and where can the viewer or the listener follow you or support you, and what's coming up?
Yeah, the podcast is the Midgame Mindset, and we're focused specifically on talking to sales leaders, marketing leaders, and entrepreneurs about their experiences and their journeys. There are a lot of discussions in podcasts about how to deal with X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be. But leaders in general, when you are a leader, it can be a very lonely place, right? You can feel alone in many ways, especially if it's hard driving and you're very focused on the business. Entrepreneurs especially will see this. And what we're trying to do with the podcast is be able to create that sense of community and to be able to learn from one another, because there are a lot of shared experiences across these types of leaders that are focused on growing their companies, not only from a business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint as well when we talk through that. So yeah, we have had some, I think, 20 plus episodes so far, in some really good conversations, getting into people's journeys about, their businesses failing and how they recovered from that and overcame it to get their business up and running again, and even more successful this time around, right? Or how do you scale a company and think about building out your sales team as your business is growing? So it's things like that that we get into, really understanding kind of the journey that somebody's going through. And that's why we call it the mid-game mindset, is because this is a journey. You're always in the middle of the game, and you've got an opportunity to make a difference and to make some changes to change the direction of where you're going. So that's what we like to focus on.
Outstanding. Folks, we'll have all the links on the video and the show notes for you to be able to follow everything that Rich is doing and support him in his endeavors. And we want to remind everybody that today's episode is sponsored by the Global Trends magazine, the Outlier Project, Bone Frog Coffee, Castle and Compass Adventures, Ascend Meditations, Chop AI, Boomcaster, and Superpass. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know by leaving a comment. And tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you. Today's episode is dedicated to the memory of Edgar Lujando, better known as Lefty. Rest in peace, my brother.